All right, welcome everybody to the Ayn Rand Center UK Poetry Hour. That's what I'm going to call this today. And today I have Tom Nowak to read a poem with us and to discuss it and to go through it. We are doing a series at the ARCUK UK on Poems I Like and Why by Leonard Peikoff. So this is a lecture Leonard Peikoff gave many years ago. It was very important to me because this is what opened up poetry to me. I hated poetry before this course, and I loved poetry after this course. So I hope you go take, it's not even a course, it's like 2 lectures. So it's not a lot. You can listen to it. He reads the poems. You can listen to it while, like when I first listened to it, I was just at the gym listening to it. And I listened to it again and again later, but that was it. So simple. But before we get into the poem, let's introduce Tom. So Tom, who are you? Deep
Well,
philosophical, poetic question.
many things. I'm an engineer by trade. I also dabble in writing a little bit. I love reading, and I do a lot of just stuff. I mean, I think Kirk knows me a little bit. I mean, I've danced, I do rock climbing, and I just enjoy a multitude of things in my life. I feel like I'm the beginning of a Renaissance man. I'm not quite there yet.
Whoa. Have you ever seen that movie Renaissance Man with Danny DeVito?
No, is it good?
Okay. Yeah, it was a cute movie. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but what I always think about when someone says Renaissance Man is there's a scene. So Danny DeVito is really short, and he is an English professor, or no, he was an advertising man, and then he becomes an English professor because he gets fired, and partly because he's all passion and no discipline. And the only job he can get as with his English degree, which he got, as to help him in advertising, because English is important in advertising, is he got a job on a military base, an army base, teaching these rejects who can't barely pass, like the basic requirements for the military. And his job is to kind of elevate them and help them get to the mind aspect of it. That's kind of what I liked about it. If I remember, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but it was like, you have these mighty men, these strong guys, and they're good at that, but they're all kind of dummies, right? And he elevates their mind with Shakespeare and gets them understanding a lot of inspiration and things like that. But anyway, the reason whenever someone says Renaissance man, what that makes me think of is there's this scene where Danny DeVito, who's like super short, and he's like standing next to this really tall, strong, like one of the strongest guys, fittest guys there, who's always like beating the course in record time type thing. And Danny DeVito's explaining what a Renaissance man was. And he talks about some guy in like the 1500s, I don't remember what era, whatever that, he could like build windmills, he could do mathematics and science. But why Danny DeVito, remember him is because he could stand still and, without running and sprint and jump, leap over a man, a full grown man. And that's why Danny DeVito, or the character, remembers him, is not just because of all those things, but what he could do physically. And that sticks in my mind. Right. And so it's like this, I liked it because it was like this combination of the physical and the mental and the intellectual. And that's, when someone tells me Renaissance man, that's what I think of.
Okay. Danny so DeVito. He teaches them with Shakespeare. So he's like doing drills, like, drop down and give me 40 soliloquies.
Yeah,
that
right.
kind of thing.
Well, they do stuff, not that, but they do like, enactments and more normal stuff, but there are scenes when that kind of thing happens. Like, yeah. So it's a cute movie. I mean, I'm gonna have to watch it again. It's actually been many years. So I wonder how it stands up, but I remember really liking that movie. Renaissance Man with Danny DeVito. And it's great because Danny DeVito is so unphysical. I think that's why it works really well, is because he's the opposite of these physical specimens, and they teach him the value of the physical stuff a little bit more, and he teaches them the value of the intellectual. And anyway, so it's like a twist on the traditional story of the the white guy going into the the slums in America and fixing the schools, and then they end up dancing and accepting each other, and it's like that's a very cliche the white missionary who solves the dumb person's problems with
Yeah.
literature. But
Yeah.
I think they did it. I think they did it right with this movie. This one is
Yeah.
like one of the better ones of that cliche.
I'm aware.
Yeah. So that's Renaissance Man. That's Tom Nowak, who claims to be a Renaissance man, and we'll see if he can leap over my
getting
head.
into it and developing.
Well, now at the next OCon, you'll have to leap over my head, and I am 6 foot. So we'll see if you can do it. Now, today we're going to be reading a poem that I think is relevant to everything we just talked about. And now, Tom, you have read this poem once before, a couple times, or you've heard
I'm familiar with it, but
Okay.
I don't know it line by line.
I used to have this memorized. I don't.
Well, I understand the thrust of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to argue that I understand the thrust of it before we start, but I feel like you're going to enlighten me to some extent because I don't know everything about it.
I mean, it's a more straightforward poem. It's not that obscure, I don't think. There might be a few references. We'll see. So do you want to read it your first time through? You want to give it a shot?
Sure.
Okay. You want to do a good reading? All right. So I'm going to share screen now. Just as a preface, this is the poem that Ayn Rand had, I think, read at her funeral, and it was even over the Westerner. I think. Don't quote me on that. Or at least part of it. I don't remember, but I remember this was very important to Ayn Rand, and it was one read. Or I think So we did the Westerner last week, or I did the Westerner, and this is one of her even more favorite poems. So that was her favorite poem, or one she loved, and she framed like 2 lines from that poem. This is her even more. Okay, so it's called If by Rudyard Kipling. So take it away.
All right. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream, I'm missing that. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those 2 imposters just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on, if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Nice. All right. So what's the first thing that strikes you about this poem? So when I read a poem, I always read it first one way through. It's never going to make sense, very rarely. Now, this poem might make sense to some people who are listening because you may have heard this poem before, but this is there's still a lot going on, and it really helps to go through it stanza by stanza and think about what's going on with each of the stanzas, especially now that we know the kind of concluding clause, the concluding phrase or whatever at the end, where it says, we have all of these conditional clauses of if this, but we never have the finishing of that, right? Like if this, then what, right? Because it's an if then statement, but we never get the then what.
Kirk, you just made me think of like a line of like programming code, and I would think if I was parsing this out, well, all these if statements would be really, really, really long because it's just condition, condition, condition. I think at the end of this there'd be like 50 brackets to end the code. But
oh, really? So that's like a common thing is they don't like tie it up really nicely.
Well, imagine adding a tab space after every if in this poem. You'd get like a really long running code.
Okay.
I just realized
but they don't have the answer to the condition, like what the condition is.
Well, the last like 2 sentences would be the then statement, right?
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And everything else would just be end. Oh man, it's a funny way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So I think, well, I mean, I don't know if he was going for coding. This is a little bit before that, but there's definitely some relation to how we think, right? So there's a if statement. When we say some kind of conditional statement like that, our mind wants an answer, like if you do the laundry, well, what then, right? Like that's our mind wants an answer to it. It's called a subordinate clause, and it's an incomplete sentence if we do that, right? So this whole thing is like one big sentence in a sense. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you do this, if you do that, if you do that, well, then what happens if I do that? And it has this conclusion that satisfies our brain's desire, which is a natural desire. And it's why incomplete sentences are so bizarre, because you can't have like, when I went to Paris. What about that? You want an answer to that question, to that statement, or to that clause. And here we have the answer. Well, if you do those things, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. So we kind of get that this is a father telling a story to his son, right? But so what does it take to be a man, according to Rudyard Kipling, as he tells this to his son, or to this narrator as he talks to his son? So like, the first statement, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. I mean, what do you think he means by that?
Well, line by line, I think it just means,
well, we won't do every line, but I just want to start there.
Yeah, well, the first one is pretty straightforward, right? So if you are able to stay calm and objective when others are not, and they're also pointing you out as a potential cause of the problem, I think it's really important to stay objective in that instance, and I think it happens a lot in your life, actually. Like I was thinking about how you could contrast this with someone who isn't the man. You might be prone to just apologize right away, like put all the blame on you or blame other people. I think that this sentence is not advocating either of those. It's saying just stay objective, right?
So that's what this whole stanza, right, maybe is about, is during times of turbulence, if you could trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, right? So I see this with people all the time, where people are giving them feedback. Maybe it's not the way they want to receive it, right? They're hearing the same thing from multiple people about their personality or about their performance or about something they're doing in life, with relationships that's bothering people in their lives, and they're not listening, right? So, but then there's people who like can't have any trust of themselves. They only rely on what other people tell them. They bend to what other people say, so they have no ability to trust themselves. When people do doubt them, maybe it was all my fault. Maybe I'm not able to do this. Maybe I should leave, and I'm not good enough. So you have to, he's telling his son to strike a balance, right? To listen. I mean, this whole thing is kind of filled with what might be, contradictions or paradoxes, right? Where it's like you have to be. I mean, maybe a little bit, but I was watching a talk by Peter Thiel recently at Lincoln Center in Florida, and he had someone asked him about like what kind of companies he looks to invest in, right? Which is a question he gets a lot. And, he's against certain formulas and things like that, because they don't seem to fit often, and they're just so there's certain things that are unpredictable. But there does seem to be some kind of odd paradox where it's like, the leader and the people in charge are both really firm, adamant, they never waver, and at the same time they do take in new feedback, right? They do take in new ideas, which is a really weird combo to have, right? It's like, I'm very adamant, this is the right way to do it, I know this is the right way to do it. Okay, that's a good idea too, let's think about that. It's like, what? Like, that's a weird paradox, but that's what you have to have, is that contradiction, that paradox.
I like how Alex Epstein phrases this. So he's talked about receiving people's criticism or hearing their opinions of him, and like he will always listen and put it into consideration, because his point is that there's usually something that they identify.
Yeah,
they might be wrong about their actual judgment of the situation, but there is something in it that is worth considering and taking back and evaluating on your own, with your own framework, because nobody else knows you better than you, right? So I mean, I really took his advice to heart. I mean, I always listen when people criticize me, or give me their opinion of whatever I'm saying, but I don't necessarily accept their judgment of it. I just consider it, and then I say, well, how does this fit into my framework? And is there anything I could take away from this that maybe I could learn from, right?
Yeah, and I think there's something with we have loads of information internally and very little information about what we do and how we're perceived externally. Like, it's very difficult for us to assess how we're perceived. That's something that is naturally not within us. And so that's one reason to look and seek. And I would even say build feedback loops in your life. So like, one flaw is, and this, if you could trust yourself, but make allowance for the doubting too, is that, in America, for instance, we have a very difficult time giving people serious feedback because we're so polite generally. I think many Americans are very polite, so they just won't say anything, even if they have real feedback, and that's a problem sometimes. And so like with Americans, you sometimes have to like work them up to it, like, build an environment at your company where it's okay and encouraged to do that. There's a great book I recommend a million times. I don't know, Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, the president of Pixar and then the president of Disney Animation. It's a great book. But I think one of the reasons he thinks he's successful is that as a leader, he has built those feedback where people feel comfortable giving real feedback to even someone who's, like a multi-million-dollar director, which can be intimidating. Like, I'm going to tell you how to make a movie all of a sudden, right? Like, a lot of people will be like, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. And that's how movies become crap. So you have to really be careful that you don't fall into that. You need to have people who will, tell you the truth, and strike that balance, which I think is what this first stanza is kind of talking about. Or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. And that's an external thing. I don't know if that's saying don't be too good or, act too wise or be too wise, but it means, don't look too good. So like he's giving his son a cautionary tale about how other people will treat you if you act a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
the talk too wise, it just gives me the impression that it would be saying more than they actually know as an attempt to sound smart or sound knowledgeable. I think that's what he's saying that not to do there, nor talk too wise.
Yeah. Well, I take this whole thing to be like social rules, like social conditions, right? Yeah. These are the things to think about when you're in the world. People are irrational. Sometimes they can have something true. It's a confusing world out there. That's what I like about this poem, is it is a good one to have up like somewhere in your house or at a school, right? Because it's a confusing world, and he's telling you some basic things to keep in mind that are in rhythm and rhyme, right? And that that you can keep it. You can memorize this. It wouldn't take that long. I haven't memorized it in a while, but I used to have it all memorized, and I could just rattle it off, and it's helpful. Okay, so let's move to the next stanza. So this one: if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. So what's like the common denominator here? Treat imposters, dreams, thoughts. I mean, it seems like your aspirations. Right?
Yeah. It seems like it's more focused on what your goals are in life, and saying to have there's a word for it, tenacity.
Okay. Yeah.
Tenacity, to not give up. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. I imagine that's you're accepting the highs and the lows of your journey, and you're still going through it.
Yeah. So I take this to be about aspirations in life. And this is a real problem that I've had, that I think a lot of people have had. I've met a lot of ambitious people that, especially young, ambitious people. I mean, this is very susceptible. Remember, this is a father to his son. So it's probably a young son. Maybe, I imagine him as like 17, 18, like he's just becoming a man, like that age. But I've met a lot of young people. I was like this, where I think their dreams were their master. It's like they want to be this and they want to be that, and they want to do this and they want to do that. And it's like, all right, well, hold on. Like,
guilty.
you want to make your dreams, like you're making dreams your master. You need to, like, choose something. You need to focus. You need to go after a thing long term. And you're going to be, and then you're going to meet with triumph and disaster, but you're not going to meet with, and the same thing with like the thoughts. Let me back up. The thoughts your aim. I think I see a lot of people like that. Even if philosophy is the thing you want to do, you're making your thoughts your aim is still not quite correct, because you still need to execute it in the real world in some way, whether that's teaching, writing, lecturing, whatever. You need to have something. So it's like, that's your aim, is publishing, is teaching, is reaching more people through your podcast, not thoughts for the sake of thoughts, like Descartesian, sitting on a couch and just dreaming stuff.
Yeah, the first line makes me think of that John Lennon song, Imagine.
Yeah.
It's, if you can dream and not make dreams your master. That's like that whole song, right? There's just, man, imagine this great world where it's just all love and no war.
Stupid song.
Yeah, it's all.
I mean, I like that he says, imagine no religion. That'd be great, but
true.
Yeah. But I know what you're saying. Yeah, it's like, imagine this, imagine no governments, imagine. It's like, I can't imagine. That'd be shit. That'd be horrible. Like, I don't want people just walking into my house. Imagine no walls or governments. Like, everyone's gonna try to murder us. Like, what's wrong with you? And I know I agree with that. That's a weird song.
And the second line makes me think of what you were talking about. The I would say it's rationalism, right? Where you value ideas qua ideas. You don't care about the actual practical outcomes or really anything with reality. Yeah. It's just you're focused on ideas as such.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this last part of it, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. I've always been like confused a little bit. Like I have a feeling I know what that means, but I'm not sure. This last line, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. That's really good advice. I mean, I think all of this is pretty good advice, but that's really good advice. Is there's going to be times in life is long. If you're lucky, you're going to live 80, 90 years. And if you actually go after things, if you have the tenacity, like you said, if you have aspirations, you're going to have setbacks, sometimes major ones, right? And you're going to have to, I always think of Edison, when he was like in his 60s or 70s or something, like his whole warehouse burned down, including some of his unique experiments. And the story that's always told of him, and this is used by Stoics as like, oh, look how stoic he was. And I mean, okay, he might have been a little bit stoic.
No,
I get
I'm
what they're
reading a
saying.
biography on him right now, actually, and I don't get the impression he was stoic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Well, in this instance, it's an example that they pull out, and he may have been, but I think he was just rational enough to understand what he had control over and what he didn't have control over, which I think is something you can learn from Stoics. But anyway, so the story is that his warehouse burned down, and he runs home to his wife and his kids or something like that, and his family, and he says, "Come, look how beautiful," right? And it's just like, it's once in a lifetime thing. You get to see this, how all of his stuff is up in flame. And the idea was that he was, I mean, people were doing what they could to put it out, but it was basically too late at this point, I think. Anyway, the point is that he's the type of person that even when his stuff goes to pot, he would build him up with the worn out tools. And I think that's a good.
That's an interesting perspective. I'm not at that part, so you spoiled the book for me, Kirk. But
Okay. I haven't read his full biography, but he's talked a lot about by Stoics.
Yeah,
that I've read.
But that's interesting that he didn't he must have mourned the loss of his stuff to some degree, but
I don't think he wanted it to happen.
Yeah.
I think he accepted that it did happen. And that's what I think the Stoics pick up on with that story. Mm-hmm. And I agree that is something. So like now it's not to say he took no action. That's another thing. Like to say he took no action is bad. But I don't think that's what happened. I think there were people putting it out. There's nothing he could do or something. And he just like, hey, look at this. This is unique. But he accepted that he couldn't do it. And then again, I imagine he would take better steps in the future not to have his stuff burned down. Right. Mm-hmm. So that I do think he learned those types of things. But anyway,
Kirk, before we go to the next paragraph, you mentioned that you had an idea about what that is. I have a theory.
Okay. If you could bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for.
Yeah, I think especially objectivists, the honest ones will come across this at some point where you have an idea or you make a statement or you build something and another person who is more dishonest just rephrases or puts in a different light something that you said in a dishonest way, to make you look bad.
So that makes me think of Amesh Adalja.
Sorry?
That makes me think. I didn't make that connection. I think that's good. That makes me think of Dr. Amesh Adalja.
Right. Who is on the he's in the World Health Organization, right?
No. Dr. Amesh Adalja is an objectivist,
right,
who spoke at OCON, and he has done a phenomenal job of kind of going out on multiple networks, so he's not pigeonholed on one side, and talking about the data, the stats, the facts about COVID-19 since like before, March 2020, since it was like since January or something, like since really early, he was going out there, he was talking, and he has been smeared, his, little statements he said. So I ran into this with the Facebook on Facebook recently myself. I posted something, he wrote an article about something, I don't remember what it was anymore. And I shared it with like some comments about how I learned so much from him. He's a big hero of mine. If you disagree with him, that's fine, but let's stay on topic, blah, blah. And somebody came in there and did exactly the opposite of what I asked them to do. And, they were blaming him for like, oh, he's fraud. He gets money from this person, from this company. He doesn't believe in ivermectin, which isn't true. So in other words, Amesh is he's out there almost every day. He's one of the hardest working people I've ever heard of. And he's talking about COVID-19. He's taught since the beginning, so like he, and he's always following the data. So at first he was saying like masks aren't ideal. They don't seem to work. Then there's new data. He's like, okay, so in some circumstances, masks, when you're in a crowded area, might have some impact, even in a broad society. And people are like, oh, he's flipping and he's such a bad person. It's like, no, he's just following the science, right? And this is what happened. And so my point is that this made me think of, I think this is a perfect line for him. If Amesh hears this, I hope he thinks, you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools.
And also, if Amesh hears this, I have to fix my error. He works for the John Hopkins Center for
Yeah.
Health Security. But
he's a practicing physician in Pittsburgh. Crap, I forgot. I can't remember where he is, but
Pittsburgh. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So he also practices, but he's also, so he's busy, and he's on TV all the time. He's on your Ron show all the time. Yep. He taught me a lot about what is going on with COVID. He's my main source, like 95% of my source of information. Anyway, this isn't a show about Amesh. I just think that this, although it could be, I just think that this line, when you were talking, that really sparked for me that connection, that I see his truths being twisted by people with bad intentions, whether they, I think it's a bit political, right? Is what I think. It's not that they're evil. They have bad intentions because of their political leanings.
It's a very valid observation, Kirk, or even Ayn Rand herself.
Well, it happens with Ayn Rand all the time. Yeah. Ayn Rand is the ARC example of that, where people, take some of her truth, like libertarianism is basically a whole aspect of one thing she said, and it's twisted by people with bad intentions or laziness to make a trap for fools, which are, I was one, I think a lot of people are, until you read Ayn Rand's actual philosophy and you see there's something much deeper here. Okay, we spent a lot of time on that. Let's move on. So we went from aspirations, right? And like, now you're going to succeed in life if you follow this advice. So the next one, I think, seems pretty straightforward, right? If you could make the one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. If you could force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. So what's the common denominator here? Lose, force your heart. So it's like will.
It's mostly accepting loss and moving forward from that, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so it's like when you have this loss that happens in life, it's going to happen sometimes. Although he does acknowledge that you might win, you might lose, like there's ups and downs in life. And don't be afraid. So I think that's one thing I would take from this is like, I meet a lot of people who get a little bit of success in life and then they stagnate for the rest of their life, right? They get to 30. I don't know how many friends are like this. Like they get to 30, they're making $150,000, $200,000 a year. They get married and their life is over, right? Like that's it. They'll they don't really strive for the things that we talked about in their 20s. They don't push themselves to go to the next level. And, I don't know that they have to all the time, but I think what he's saying here is there's value in pushing yourself throughout your entire life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not at that age yet, so I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope I've prepared myself enough, at least intellectually, to be able to keep pushing for my goals long past my 30s. I want to be able to do that my whole life, right? And that, I think that just takes a strong intellectual framework of your life, like a view of your life that says it's important the whole way through. There's no point where it ends.
Yeah. Like Edison is again a good example. He, I think of Sam Walton, Steve Jobs. Like these are good archetypes. These are good ideals because they worked. Like Sam Walton, the story goes, he worked like until 2 days before he died, or something. Like, or 2 days before he died, he was working in his office or something like that. Steve Jobs, even when he got cancer, if you listen to that famous speech he did, I think in 2005 at Stanford or where it was, but there's a famous speech of his. And I wrote an article about this long time ago, but what, most people have a bucket list. Steve Jobs had a productive list. He's like, I got cancer. And like the thing I thought about is like, man, I want to make the iPad. I want to make the iPod. I want to make, like all these things he wanted to produce before he died. And I just thought that's the way I want to go out. Right. Like, cause I want to write a book. I want to, learn how to sing. I want to do piano, like whatever. Or I want to, do a series of podcasts on some, lectures, whatever it is. but like that producing and moving like that, I think is a good example. And then, Steve Jobs, it might even be a good example here. If you could force your heart, nerve, and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, which I think he did. And so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will, which says to them, hold on. And I think, again, he did. Like, if you look at him at the end, how skinny he was, and he was still like, there's his last conference, whatever it's called, the Mac Con or whatever they do, Mac World thing. He was skinny, right? He was really bone skinny, and he was still up there with energy, doing the thing he loved to the day he died.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me sad, but it was beautiful.
What does the line to serve your turn long after they are gone mean? So it's, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone. What is he saying long after they are gone?
Well, I guess I see that as like, the I don't want to say the will to triumph of the will, but like that kind of thing where it's like your body is given up, but your will keeps moving. So there's a poem we'll do later called Ulysses, where Ulysses is old. Again, like Steve Jobs' body had given out, but he was still fighting long after his body had given up. Right. And so the will that was in him was part of the strength that was, pushing him to keep moving, to keep building, to keep working, to keep doing what he loved. And I think that's what it's like, your heart, your nerve, your sinew. So you're like, you really don't want to, and you could also take these metaphorically, heart as in your courage, nerve is courage, heart as your, I don't know,
your passion
for it. Yeah. And sinew, like your ability, your physical ability of strength, maybe. Those are gone. And now you just have your will. It's pure will moving forward through the desert alone, like the guy who just, his body gives up, but it's all will. It's like the marathon runner at the last couple, or David Goggins all his life, right? If you know who that is. Like these guys who like their body's given out and they're still moving, right? They're still going forward. And that's pure will. Okay, last stanza. If you could talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. So again, here we have the concluding if-then statement that kind of tells us what this has been about. So what do you think of this? What's going on with this last couple lines before the then statement? Although there's no then, but it's it's assumed. It's like, if you could fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, then here's the. I mean, it's not there.
Yeah,
but
I think that the first 4 lines are sort of the same theme, and then the last 4 lines are just the conclusion of the poem.
Yeah, I mean, he's talking about again, I guess the common denominator, I don't like, of these 4 lines is something social again. And it's good advice so it's like, I feel like maybe this first stanza is social in all areas of your life, but this is like, you maybe, again, success has come to you. So you're meeting presidents, you're meeting famous people, and you're not letting it affect you, right? You're still going to be you. You're not going to lose the common touch. I think is, common is an interesting word choice there, but I just take that to mean like you're going to be down to earth. You're going to be real. You're not going to be like, it's not that maybe you are better than some people, but you're not going to treat them that way. That's not necessary. And again, there's a kind of individualism. There's the Howard Rourke is a good example, right? You could imagine him getting all the accolades and the praise finally, and that at the end of the Fountainhead, and it's not going to really change who he is. He's going to keep going with what he does, keep building the way he wants to. That's what he set his life to be.
It's interesting you bring up Howard Rourke here because, his success doesn't really change his personality. It's just, he just takes it as his personality is already like he's already created those traits that make him successful. And so like he doesn't need to change anything when he's successful. I think that's a good way to look at your life, right? You shouldn't rely on the many or few successes you have to build good character.
Well, that's what this poem's about then. You just got, I think you struck it. It's building an internal character that the external world, there's a lot you don't have control over, which again is Stoic. And I think this poem is also, this poem is often taken by Stoics, but it's more than that. Like it's not, there is a truth there. There is a truth in the sense that you don't have full control over this. So the thing you do have control over, you want to build. And that's why I think this is such a good poem to have hanging up in your house. In fact, years ago, like maybe 7 years ago, something like that, I tried starting a little company. What was it called? I don't even remember anymore. But I started so many little companies, but this one was like I was going to design and create motivational poems for people's motivational posters for office buildings, right? You know, all those cheesy motivational posters.
Oh, okay.
But instead of the cheesy ones, I was going to do poetry and like have a well designed. And I hired someone and they did a good design. They did a nice little design of this poem, and I sold a decent amount of them. I sold, but the point is that I think like this is better motivation than like the hang in there or character, and then it's like two astronauts out in space. Like that's garbage. Like that's not connecting it. This is how you connect it: sound and meaning, which is poetry, right? It's the combination of sound and meaning, and that's what we get from this poem. And you know, I really like it.
Yeah.
Now the lot. Oh, go ahead. You gonna say something?
Well, I mean, I was gonna make a broad statement about the poem. Sure. Maybe we can do that later, but I like how integrated the. Oh, you just minimized. Hold on. Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to see it again?
No, it's fine. I just like how integrated the poem is overall. It's not just disparate pieces of advice.
Yeah.
There is because I think a lot of self-help books, a lot of motivational speakers, they fall into this trap where they have like disparate ideas that aren't necessarily connected.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But and the problem with that is if you just view those things floating without any grounding or framework to integrate them, I think a lot of people just read it and say, oh yeah, that's good advice, and then they don't use it, right? But I think this is, at least it's presented in a way that's like a framework for living. So it's much more connected than many of those former people that I mentioned, which I like. You can hold it, you can retain it in a way that a lot of those snippets of advice just don't do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've read a lot of, or I have in the past read a lot of self-help books, and there's a lot of that where it's, you know, here are the 50 rules. And you see this with like blog posts where it's like listicles, which I'm not a big fan of. You know, 10 things to do this, or
number 7 will surprise you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like they're all disconnected. It's like some cliche, and it's just clickbait that doesn't really help you think. You have to you know, you need something deeper. You need a philosophy. You need a good metaphysics, epistemology. Even if you're not a philosopher, you need it. Like that's one of the core things of objectivism. Is that everybody has, you have one, you just don't know what it is.
Imagine rewriting this poem as a listicle.
Well, that would be easy though, right? Like keep your head when all about your employment, right? And it could work as in that sense where you get like that. But the thing that makes this a poem is that it has rhythm and rhyme, right? So, you know, if it has like a kind of cadence, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you too, and waiting and lies and hating and wise. And so there's a kind of like a rhythm to you, it's a to wow, you too. So A, waiting, lies, hating, wise. Oh, that's interesting. So B, C, B, C. It's like, is that like all the way through? Master, aim, disaster? No. Interesting. So
No,
I
that's
haven't really done an
A, B,
analysis of his rhythm and rhyme, but what's that?
The second paragraph is more, well, actually, yeah, you're right.
Master, aim, disaster. So it's A, B,
B,
A.
A.
Same aim. So B, spoken, broken. So I guess that's B again. B, fools, tools. Yeah, so it's like A, B, A, B, or A, B. No,
A, B,
yeah,
A,
A,
B,
B,
C,
A.
D, C, D.
Yeah, I think something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've never really tried to do it off the top of my head. I always have to write it out. So anyway, yeah. So I mean, it's an I don't know what he's going for with there. This is, yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know. I'd have to think more about that. But the that's better than a listicle is the point, because it sticks in your head better. It matches your cadence more. Anyway, so last thing is, I was curious if you could guess the one part that Ayn Rand disagreed with, the one line, or the ones like small. It's like one or two lines, one if conditional.
There was a line that
You
I
did
was
mention it.
doubtful of.
Which one? Take a guess. What do you all think, who are listening? Pause now and put it in the comments what you think the line is before I tell you. It'll be obvious once you hear it, I think.
I think I've lost it.
I'll give you one hint. It's in this stanza. That's the last hint. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you could bear to hear the truth you've spoken. All right, I'm going to tell you.
I think it's imposters. I think
Yeah.
yeah.
No. Oh, yeah. If you can meet with, that's the one. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. I mean, I think this struck at her view of the malevolent universe versus benevolent universe premise, where she didn't think triumph was a disaster or was an imposter, right? Like that is again, that is like, I think what's one of the things that separates, is my opinion, that's one of the things that I think separates her from Stoics, or one of the major things, one of many. But if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters, so triumph is not an imposter, right? And in a sense, disaster necessarily isn't either. So what Kipling is kind of indicating here, I think, is the sense that what happens to you doesn't really matter that much, right? You should treat it as though it's just an imposter. So if you get a lot of successes, it's an imposter, it's going to be taken from you. That's the Stoic view of everything, is that everything can at any moment be taken from you. And it's like, there's some truth that it can be, like things can happen, but that's not, again, the Ayn Rand view is the wife of Ragnar Danistold. Can't remember her name. Dang it. What's her name?
She's a ballet dancer, isn't she?
I think she's an actress, but she where she she knows that disasters are possible, but she doesn't live her life as though it's going to happen just because he has this dangerous job. Like, she knows he's capable, and she also knows that she expects the more positive outcome, because she believes that that's possible, and that's what she thinks is what's going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean that she doesn't know, and she's stupid and doesn't know that things bad can happen. But anyway, so I think that's what Ayn Rand kind of had, nettled her a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So any last thoughts on If by Rudyard Kipling?
Just it's very nicely put together with a bow. I think it's easy to retain, and that's what I like about it. And it's very good individualistic advice. I think there's very little garbage in this poem, which is why it's so good.
Yeah, and I guess the maybe one last thing is there's a the controversy behind it is that this is in today's world, is that this is Rudyard Kipling saying this is what it means to be a man. So the question is this what it means to be a woman? Like, can women do this, right? Does all of this apply equally to women, or is there something unique about it that's for men? And there have been like not parodies, but like not making fun of it, but like a poem written in the same rhyme and meter by women for women, where it's telling feminine traits, right? I don't think they're very good. I don't know why. The ones I've read, and it's been a while, they're not terrible. I don't think that I've read some that are like okay. I don't. So maybe it's like our sexist culture that it just leans toward man. I don't know, or this is just a great poem. But it's just an interesting thing to think about. Like, once you've read this, understood it, is this applicable to humans? Which I think it probably is. Or is there something innate within men that there's uniqueness to it? I mean, like the dreaming stuff, if you can keep your head when all about you, or losing theirs and blaming it on you, people are doubting. I mean, that applies to everybody, right? I don't know if anything doesn't apply to a
Well,
person.
my take on it is that I think that the same values are applicable to both sexes, but there's emphasis placed on different virtues and values for each sex. That doesn't mean that the other ones are not needed or
Other ones, what?
unnecessary. Well,
Other virtues?
yeah, so I would say like
feminine virtues, you mean?
yeah, like grace, right? Like
yeah, so that's one of the ones they would talk about in
yeah. If you talk about masculine virtues, grace is not really mentioned, but as a guy, you should still have grace. Like it's still something that would be good to have. It's not like
yeah. No, I agree, but the question is there anything in this poem that doesn't apply to a woman? Right? So are these masculine traits that he's talking about? Now you could just, the poem has to choose man or a woman. This happens to be a man telling this advice to a son. Maybe it's that it's late 19th century and there was more, women weren't able to vote yet. They didn't have autonomy and independence. So this didn't really apply to them then as much as it does today, right? Like this is something that a woman would have to deal with today that she probably didn't have to deal with in the same way. And I think she probably did even then. Like if you read 19th century novels, there is definitely, so I mean, like there is like some sexist, it could be thought of that way, maybe. I don't think it is. I just, I try to be sympathetic to, like a woman who wants it to, and you just have to accept that it's a father to a son, and just like it's still good advice for daughters. I think for
you
anybody.
have to recognize the historical context. I think.
Yeah. Well, but again, like as poetry, he can't say, like it can't end. Yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more. You'll be either a man or a woman, my son.
My son / daughter.
Or my son. Like this is the thing about political correctness is, and I hear this all the time when I'm dealing with like these pronoun stuff, is like it ruined, like you have to make a choice and be clear, and especially in art. And this is like, you can't do it. Like it doesn't rhyme the same if you do, you'll be a woman, my daughter.
You'll be a human, my child.
Yeah, like, and it's just, I mean, I guess it doesn't like, again, it has to be very specific. The more specific, the better. In art. And so I think there's just some choice of that. And then women could write one for daughters. That's great. They want to have a different one. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on If by Rudyard Kipling. So thank you,
Kirk.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
I enjoyed walking through this with you.
Good. Yeah, it was a fun one. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Put your comments, share, and I believe this is going out on Tuesday, which is Giving Tuesday in America. So give to your favorite charity. And that would mean ARCUK or the Ayn Rand Institute. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.